stream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh.
Good morning. This is from Whispers from Eternity, a book of prayer poems by Paramahansa Yogananda. This is called Flowers and Skies, Heralds of Thee. Flowers, cloud-scattered skies, and all beautiful blossoming scenery, all these only suggest thy divinity. I enjoy them, I revel in them, but then they remind me of thee. In that remembrance, these mere, though glorious, messengers vanish, and the beauty of my own beloved infinity enthralls me. This reading is from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda, which are parallel commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. This week's reading is entitled, By Thinking Can We Arrive at Understanding? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. There are many places in the Gospels, in the Bible, where we see Jesus in open conflict with the Pharisees, that is to say, with man-made as opposed to true mystical tradition. The Pharisees were the Orthodox priests of the time and sort of the ones with all the power. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, we see a good example of how they and he locked horns. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees from Jerusalem came and asked Jesus, Why do your disciples break our ancient tradition and eat their food without washing their hands properly first?" Jesus, after scolding them for their hypocrisy in observing lesser rules so carefully while ignoring the much more important ones, said, "Listen and understand this thoroughly. It is not what goes into a man's mouth that makes him common or unclean. It is what comes out of a man's mouth that makes him unclean." It wasn't that Jesus counseled against such wholesome practices as washing one's hands before eating. In an age, however, when lesser rules were given too much importance relative to the truly important observances, cleansing the heart of impure desires, for example, he emphasized the supreme importance of loving God and of communing with Him. The Pharisees, the Orthodox religionists of his day, in other words, had brought true religion down to a level of intellectual hair-splitting. They mistakenly considered the way to understanding to lie through a minefield of definitions, which they tried to refine to ultimate exactitude. Jesus taught, however, that the intellect alone can never lead one to truth. Without love, indeed, there is no ultimate verity or truth. Without fixity of purpose, born of the heart's devotion, the intellect wanders endlessly. It cannot settle for long on anything. As the Bhagavad Gita says in the 2nd chapter, "The intellects of those who lack fixity of spiritual purpose are inconstant, their interests endlessly ramified." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. As you know, we are fast approaching the holiday of Easter, which is on April 1st this year, Sunday, April 1st. It's always on a Sunday. And it changes with each year, something to do with the first Sunday after the full moon or new moon or some moon. And so we've been thinking and focusing on the life of Jesus, also as not only the founder of a great religion and a great spiritual teacher and avatar, but also as one in our line of gurus. Because it was Jesus who appeared to Babaji and said, "Let us send a new teaching into the world." And in fact, it was Babaji who directed Sri Yukteswar to create these parallel commentaries on the teachings of the Bible and the teachings of the Hindu scriptures to show their similarity. And Sri Yukteswarji did that in the book, The Holy Science. And then that was continued by Yoganandaji in his own Sunday satsangs, commenting on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita. And so, of course, with Swami Kriyanandaji's book, we do the same thing. Why have the book? Well, you see, Yoganandaji, of course, when giving a talk, had the distinct advantage over other speakers that he was one with God. And so he could just, look up into the spiritual eye and speak from that wisdom. As he said, just when I was standing here, my body swayed a little like this. He said, for that instant I was away from the body. And then I came back. Now, that would be a pretty nice trick. And we should look forward to that day. But it's important to give a concise and clear connection between these two passages, and it's not always easy to do so on the spot. When going into something, we go on and make sure that we've made the point and so on. Swamiji even said, when speaking, touch lightly on your points, rather than, making the point and then emphasizing it and then saying, understand, and just to review, and in summary, and to recap, because partly we're so thrilled we managed to make a point and then want to make sure everybody heard it. And so he said, touch lightly. Partly that gives people the freedom to sit with the point, You know how it is if someone says, you have to watch this movie. Oh, yeah, it's really good. Yeah, you really have to watch it. Oh, okay. I mean, it's fantastic. It's the best movie. You must go. Do you want to go tonight? I don't know. I'm kind of busy. You have to see the movie. You finally just start thinking, Vaindam, I don't want it. Just because you're pushing me. It might even be a good movie. In fact, that happened to me. There was one movie that I didn't see out of sort of rebellion against constant recommendations, and years later I finally saw it and I loved it, and I thought, how stupid am I that I resisted just because people were pushing me. Sure, they were pushing me, but it was a good thing. Why should I have felt pushed? That was the thing. Sure, they were pushing me, but it didn't mean I had to feel pushed. This was even true this is not a concrete example, but it is an example. Swami Kriyananda was in Bali many years ago in the 1950s. And there was a woman there who was trying to do a little black magic on him. And what she would do is the way she did this to people is she would light a match, and the flame would, of course, be sticking up. And then with her willpower, with her intensity, she would make the flame point at the person. And that was a way of sort of penetrating their aura, and then she could do whatever thing she wanted to do, which, by the way, black magic, of almost all things, black magic creates the worst karma. So, first of all, don't do it, which I don't imagine any of you are. But on the other hand, also know that if people are doing it, people are sometimes afraid of black magic. The black magician is suffering and is going to suffer much worse than anyone else who they're trying to practice on. But anyway, so the flame she was trying to get it to point at Swamiji. She was sitting behind him, or I think, and he didn't even know she was doing this, and the flame kept pointing at her. And so no matter what she did, she could not get that flame to point at him. And again, he wasn't even aware. It wasn't that he was trying to push the flame. He didn't even know it was happening. And she turned to someone who knew Swamiji and said, I'll tell you one thing, too much damn willpower. And so again, that's an example, though as I said, not an everyday example, of somebody trying to impose on us, on Swamiji in this case, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter to him. He didn't even know. So this happened in a dinner he was having with somebody. They were sitting around, and the dinner table, and he noticed at the end of dinner, his friend said to him, I couldn't believe how rude they were being to you. And Swamiji said, I didn't notice. And there were times when people were rude to him, and he did notice. Someone said to him in a satsang, when he was talking about the book of Brigu and, these palm leaf manuscripts, and someone said, this may sound strange to the initiated here, but as somebody who, can you tell me there's a village where people can predict the future of everyone's life? What exactly is this you're talking about? And Swamiji said, well, you do understand the word village, don't you? And so, I was just saying, then so Swamiji went on to answer, and he said, you're skeptical, and I share your skepticism. Which, of course, on one level, he didn't. He was the one telling the story. But he was trying to meet people where they were. But he gave this man a little shock, because he was coming with such a closed mind, actually. Closed heart, also. We need the heart in order to understand anything, as we're going to get into today. So, in another example, someone was very upset with Swami Kriyananda, and he had constantly been criticizing him. This is an example of not being affected. And so he had been a friend, and then he turned against Swamiji, betrayed him, and then tried in many different ways, actually, which continued on, to slander Swamiji and to publicly denounce him. And when they happened to meet at a function in public, and Swamiji saw him, and he went up to him, and he said, how are you, Jim? And would you, you should come up sometime and see me, and we could have tea. And the man said, and what will we talk about? Loyalty to the guru? And Swamiji said, Jim, I could be the devil himself, and it wouldn't be your problem. And the man said, I know. And then for one moment his mask dropped, but then it came back again. And Swamiji could have just said, head goes back, ego engaged, let it loose. No, he just said, look, it's just not your problem. Someone said the same thing to Swamiji once. He was walking in London and she was very consciously being rude to him. He would say, that reminds me of a story. And she would say, just a minute, and walk away. And then come back later and say, yeah. And so, it wasn't that she was taking a call or going to water the garden or something. She was just stepping aside. So this happened enough. And Swamiji said he felt in his heart, or in his mind and heart, the temptation to withdraw. Just if she's not interested, then why bother talking? But he thought, no, I don't want to do that. Why should I close my heart even a little bit? Because then I walk around with a slightly pinched heart. So it wasn't that he said, oh, please open your heart to God. No, if she wasn't interested, fine. Again, he wasn't going to impose either. But she, at the same time, he was not going to have an unhappy time just because she was unhappy. So he went on in this way. And finally she said, Kriyananda, I am really concerned about your ego. And what did he say? My ego? Anika. Excuse me, if somebody has an ego around, no, if somebody has an ego around here, it's definitely, be careful how we finish that sentence, because either way we're wrong. If we say me, we're right. If we say you, we mean me. It takes ego to fight against an ego like that. If you do it that way, you could say it from God, true, but it wouldn't help the person necessarily. So anyway, he said to her, well, that's not really your problem, is it? And it stopped her in her tracks, because it really isn't her problem. Somebody could be headed straight down to hell in the express lane. And meaning because they're being so bad, but even so what? Pray for them if you can, but that's up to them. That's how they're going to learn. And so if someone said this to me, I'm wondering if that person, I did that and that person sort of made a nasty look like, and I felt embarrassed. I said, but when they make a look like that, it's a reflection on them. It's not a reflection on you. Look at their face. It's written right there. Take a picture. Wouldn't it be perfect to get a picture of someone's face? And say, who's the one with the problem? Not the person who you're making the face at. And so I think it would be great, have you have your phone and say something stupid on purpose and then say, you see that? But before you do that, make sure you do it to yourself first. Because we can find ourselves doing that. I remember my mother went on a campaign to get me to stop rolling my eyes when I was a teenager. Because anything she would say, would you like some breakfast? I just had this constant through my teenage years, this eye-rolling thing. Maybe I was trying to go in samadhi. No, I wasn't. It's just total ego. So, like I said, we have to first look in the mirror and see what reaction is coming here before we worry about anybody else's. So, in this way, we don't have to be affected, you see. And if you study the lives of the masters, you see how they aren't affected, and that inspires us to know that it's possible to not be affected. Because the things that finally do affect us, of course, we are perfectly justified in being affected by. And anyone in this situation would have to say something strong. I'm not angry, I'm just saying something calm and strong. But this person needs to... Forget it. As soon as the volume gets to a certain level, as a friend of mine said, I realized that in a debate, as soon as my tone of voice changed, I was wrong. Even if what I said was right, factually, I was wrong because of the energy behind it. You don't, in fact, want to say a truth in anger. Because if it's a truth, it probably would help the other person eventually to hear it. But if we say it in anger, then we poison it. And we poison a truth that actually could be beneficial. You see? And these are all obvious things, but in the moment... Master had that experience too with someone. I said that Swamiji had his heart open to the person, but he wasn't trying to pull them out of it because they weren't wanting to. But Master tells this wonderful story of being, which I'm sure many of you have heard in his recordings of him telling it, that he was sitting on a train facing someone, And he was dressed in, Master was dressed in his orange robes with his long hair, because he was going to give a program, and the man was sitting across from him, just with this awful look in his face. And Master said, I knew that to be angry with him was foolish, would be childish, he said. But to let him go on being angry was also foolish, he said. So I thought of healing him. And so you see, when you gain in strength, you can find ways possibly you might be able to heal the person. You might be able to charm them. And so Master said to him, "Pardon me, why do you make such a face?" And the man said, "None of your business." And Master said, "Of course it's my business, because every time I look ahead, I have to see your face." And so the man started laughing and said, "What an impetuous person you are." And Master went on to say, basically, we will understand each other in a little while. This man was actually a famous actor, and Master knew him and said, "You don't know me, but I know you." And his name was Warner Oland, who was a famous movie star back then. And he became Master's disciple over that time. And, I'll just finish that last part because it's so good. Master said that you don't know what kind of craziness I have, but I know what kind of craziness you have, because I know you. So fools argue and wise men discuss. Let us discuss. And if at the end of the discussion, a constructive discussion, I lose, I will follow you and be a movie actor. And then he said, but if you lose, then you follow me. And he said throughout all the debate, 2 hours long they went on, and Master said he kept one avenue open for the man in the debate, that there was one way out, which of course was to God, I'm sure. And then finally the man had to admit defeat, and Master said he lost and I won, and I was saved from being a movie actor. So, as I was saying before all of this, because we are approaching the Easter time, we are focusing, which is the time of Christ's Mahasamadhi and resurrection. We are studying his life in more detail, according to also the explanations given by Yoganandaji. And in this book, of course, Rays of the One Light, focuses a lot on the Bible and doesn't give as great an in-depth commentary on the Gita. There's the original book that this sort of came from, meaning the first version, you could say, Rays of the Same Light, where Swamiji wrote basically equal-length commentaries on these same Bible and Bhagavad Gita passages. But they were so long that in time for the service, people requested him repeatedly. At one point, he got a fax, on the days of fax machines, and he said he could practically see the tear stains on the fax saying, "Please, can we have something shorter to read at services?" So he wrote this sort of condensed version. But often the Bible passages require a lot more explanation for a number of reasons, and the Gita passages have lesser. But I thought it would be interesting also, because another reason why there's an emphasis that way is because many people, of course, in the West, and many here, grow up with the Bible, and so it's sort of, this story, but this is really the explanation. Whereas when Krishna says, those who worship me come to me, those who worship lesser gods go to their gods, what that means is, those who worship me come to me, and those who worship their lesser... In me, it's pretty clear what he means. It doesn't require a lot of... When he says, worship me, he means worship me. Now, there are deeper and deeper levels of understanding, sure, but the basic understanding isn't so far removed. One great advantage the Gita has in terms of its English translation is that it was done very recently, relatively speaking. It's either 66 or 86. I think it was 86. It's 10 years. Is that right? From the time of the founding of America. I think that's right. Anyway, it's not long ago in terms of our English. So the translation is done in recent English. So what I'd like to read to you a little bit is what Master's explanations of Jesus' words in this story. So first, I'll read what the Bible says, and then Master restates it, saying that, restating it in basically modern language, but also according to the meaning of it. And so in this way, it's helpful because the Bible is really full of stories of Jesus' life and full of his words. And if we can the Gospels are the story, that part of the Bible, and it can be helpful because as we learn these stories, then we come to appreciate the Master. And if we know the stories, then it helps us to understand more deeper aspects of it. But we know how Krishna was always naughty and his mother tried to tie him up, and we know how he stole the ghee all the time, and we know how he became so heavy that the demon was pulled out of the air and crashed to earth. And we know all these amazing stories that are so lovely and they make us just smile and they're so fun. And so in the same way, it's through stories that you can actually get to know a saint, or in this case an avatar. Same thing with Master's life, Swamiji's life, the stories I just told. Rather than saying, in the beginning there was you can do that too. But still, it's nice to have these little stories that we can relate to on a heart level. And so, the Bible says, again, I'll just repeat it. I'll just read it as it is, Master restates it. Then came to Jesus scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, saying, Why do thy disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. And so Master restates this, saying, Jesus was saying, sorry. I wrote this a little bit wrong, and so I forgot to put what Jesus said, but this is what he meant. Whatever he said, this is what he meant. Tell me, why do you spend your time in following localized customs and forget to follow God's commandments? Tell me, which is the greater sin? To ignore tradition and follow God's commandments, or to ignore God's commandments in order to follow traditional customs? You know full well that in order to outwardly appear holy, you prefer to follow your traditional customs and utterly reject the commandment of God. This is, of course, not just true in Jesus' time. It's true in all times that there can be a tendency, there is a tendency of the establishment, the established religion, which is often called Orthodox, meaning sort of sticking to the letter of the law. But it's wrong to call it Orthodox, because Orthodox really means being true to the teaching. And so really, when you, for example, are meditating, rather than following all these outward rituals, you're being more orthodox, according to the teachings of Krishna, than if you were just doing these ceremonies without any devotion, without any understanding, without looking for the purpose of the ceremonies. And so when we say the word orthodox, meaning people who just stick to what we might say the old forms without looking to the meaning behind them, it's a misuse of the word, but it's become common. It's very often that words meaning something eventually come to mean the exact opposite. And so that's in fact what it means this way. So you can tell yourself, I'm very orthodox. If someone says, why are you so unorthodox? You can smile. So, again, we see it over and over and over again. Why do the avatars come? They have to come to correct the whole way the thing has been going. That's why Jesus came. Master said, think of God as your mother, not your father, because mother is closer than the father. The father will discipline and say no food as punishment, and the mother will say no food, but at least have some dosa. And so he said, your mother will sort of help you. And so you won't have to be as afraid of her. So that was a correction to people thinking of the father as being stern, even though that was still wrong. Jesus taught that God is your father, and he never put him across as stern, but people started to take it that way. So does that mean Jesus was wrong in saying God is your father? Of course not. He was saying God is your father because the people in his day were saying God is not your father, he's a judge in a court. So he could care less. And you can say, Appa, it doesn't make any difference because he doesn't even know you. You broke the law, finished. Here's the penalty. And Jesus said, God is your own father. Is he going to throw you into prison uncaringly because you broke some law? He wants to help you, he wants to train you, but he has a vested interest in your survival, personally, in your health, in your well-being. It isn't just that he's an implementer of the law. So you see, again, there's a correction, but then in time it veers off. So then another correction is needed, and then in time it veers off, and that's how the avatars stay in business. They have to keep coming to wake us all up from our wrong understanding. And so, then Jesus goes on to say, "Ye hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, These people draweth nigh to me with their mouth, and honoureth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men." You see? So, can you imagine such a thing, that people are nice and polite, but their hearts are far? Master was warning his own disciples against that. One woman said, "Why don't I receive you in meditation like others do?" He said, "If you shut me out, how can I come in?" He meant it. He didn't mean, if you shut me out, well then just see what I do in retaliation. It wasn't that. He was saying, I'm trying to get in, but the door is closed. They won't push. And so when Swamiji said to Master at the end of his life, "When you are gone, will you be as near to us as you are now?" Master said, "To those who think me near, I will be near." He was teaching us that you have to open your heart. So back in Jesus' day, what is he saying? Same thing. Not this, in this case, not to his disciples who were trying to be devoted, but even people who were, "Oh, Master," faking it and completely. They're totally insincere. And what does he do? He quotes Isaiah. How many hundreds or thousands of years before did he live? And what does he say? "They honor me with their mouth, but their heart is far from me." Same thing. So we can get here the common problem. Be sincere in your heart. And work on that sincerity. How? Okay, well, we can talk about that. But the point is, this is what you can imagine. In 3,000 years, one of the masters will come in on a flying saucer and land and everything, and people will be there, and people who can't be there will time travel, because in 3,000 years we'll be able to travel in time, I think, or something like that. Anyway, all these things will happen, and they'll get there to hear the words of the master and then just be... or insincere. You see, the consciousness doesn't change. It's the same challenge whether you have new technology or no technology. You can be looking at your iPhone, we can be looking at a stone and just sort of, I hope it will do something. And we can have chip implants and holographic things that we're seeing with our eyes and all that, and doesn't matter, same consciousness. And so that's what we have to work on. And if we work on that, we solve the whole problem. Literally, because if you get free, then you come back to earth as a saint. So then you don't really care if you have an iPhone or a UFO or whatever it is, because you're happy in God all the time. And without being a saint, we won't be happy, even with 2 UFOs. He says, Master said what Jesus was saying, "Ye hypocrites who are outwardly holy and inwardly wicked, how fittingly Isaiah prophesied about you, after feeling these truths from his consciousness of cosmic vibration. Indeed, he prophesied correctly about the nature of those who come to masters with sweet language and respectful utterances, but with hearts sunk deep in the depths of insincerity. In vain do such men worship me, since they teach for doctrines and commandments of men in preference of the commandments of God. Because you have laid aside the law of God for perfect living, as revealed through the prophets, you have clung to useless traditions of men, such as the washing of hands before meals. Isn't it better that you wash your souls by following the pure laws of God as revealed through the seers, rather than spending your time in following traditional customs which produce no lasting spiritual results?" And so this also, in Jesus' time, he would perform miracles. He would heal people. There was a man who couldn't walk, and Jesus said, "Go forth and sin no more, take up thy bed and walk," and so on. The man found he could stand, and he carried his little bed. I don't imagine it was sort of a, twin thing with drawers and so on. I think it was probably just like this tiny little thing made of straw or whatever. And so what did the priests say? What did the people say? They said, wow. I mean, what did the priests say? They said, today is the Sabbath day, and you're not supposed to do any work today. And so it is work to cure someone of their lameness. I mean, here it is. He made a blind man see. No, don't do any work on today. Today there's supposed to be no work. I mean, can you imagine it? I mean, just imagine somebody here has some big healing, and we say, actually, no, not right now. Yeah, that should be in the afternoon. It's ridiculous. But that's also, according to them, they were invoking some spiritual law. And he was saying you should follow the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. Regarding this law, that you're supposed to have a day of rest, Master said, the Sabbath was made for man, meaning for man's sake, not man for the Sabbath. It's not that these rules are somehow, any rules of any religion are given and you better follow them. The 10 Commandments, the yamas and niyamas, this is how it is. And if you don't do it, you are sinful. Ridiculous. These are given to us for our own happiness, for our own sake. They're saying, listen, people have lived a long time before you, and some of the smart ones figured out that this will give you what you're actually seeking. You see what I said? Not, it will make you holy, it will make you good, it will even make you happy. Even though, of course, that is what we're seeking. They're saying, what you actually want, you will find this way. But it's not obvious. There's no scripture that says, eat lots of ice cream every day. You don't need to write a scripture because everybody knows that already. There's no teaching needed. Then we find out in time that I actually should say, well, maybe every other day. And then maybe actually once you're 50, then you have to kind of, So the thing is, the obvious things that are attractive, no one needs teaching about. It's the unobvious teachings that we need education about. And he called the multitude, this is back to the Bible, and he called the multitude and said to them, hear and understand, meaning listen and understand. Not that which goes into the mouth makes a man unclean, but that which comes out of the mouth, that makes him unclean. Now, it may be obvious to you what he means, but just imagine if that it wasn't. We've already heard the explanation, but just imagine if someone says, it's not what goes into you that makes you unclean. If someone said, why are they eating non-veg? They're acting spiritual, but they're eating non-veg. And someone said, it's not what goes into your mouth that makes it unclean, it's what comes out of your mouth that makes it unclean. And again, try to not be smart and just go, So, how can it be? I mean, what comes out of a man's mouth? And anyway, let's not go into it too deeply, but how could it be? What are you talking about? So, Master says, Jesus said, lend me your attention, all of you, and by tuning your attention with me, try to understand that no outward custom or evil environment can affect a man from outside his consciousness. But any experience or thought which gets into his consciousness and saturates it, and then comes out of him as an evil desire or action, does desecrate him, and bring suffering unto him. You see, that's the point. What makes a man unclean? When a man is unclean, why is that bad? Because then we can say, unclean! No! It's because the man himself suffers. You see? He's not saying what makes people bad and lesser and evil. He's saying what makes people suffer. It's the harm that it does them that was his concern. Not in saying, these are the good people, these are the bad people. It reminds me of a funny scene from a movie. This kid shows up for school, I don't know if the school was in Calcutta or somewhere, and he has a problem because his tie wasn't properly tied, and sort of a sad story. His mom wasn't there and all this, and so he did the best that he could, but his tie isn't properly tied, and their kids are coming in, and someone stops him at the door and says, no, go to the side. And so he has to go out the door and be on the side. And then you see there's a kid there with his shirt untucked, and there's somebody else that has their pants ripped, and somebody else whose tie is on, backwards or something. All the sort of misfits, and they all kind of look at each other, and I thought, oh my God, how well I could relate to that. That's like all of us, or at least all of me, just kind of not quite, putting it together, and just sort of that they're, no, wrong, because you feel like you don't fit. And you know what? In some cases, it's better not to fit. Some basic thing of, button the pants and put the clothes on and all that. But beyond that, it's just like, we don't want to be uniform because we're not. It's a fake thing to say that everybody is like this and the same. Everyone should have equal opportunity, sure. All of that, of course, is true. But we can't say that everyone's exactly alike. Everyone has the same rights on one level, sure. But is everyone of equal intelligence, equal athletic skill? If everyone had athletic skill equal to me, there would be no televised sports ever. No one would want to watch except on the Comedy Channel. So, continuing on. This is the whole story. This is my favorite part. Then came his disciples. Now these are not the insincere people. These are Jesus' own. And said unto him, Knowest thou that the Pharisees were offended after they heard this saying? But he answered them. Again, it's just natural. Don't think that people are walking around going, Knowest thou that the Pharisees were offended? And he said, Be thou of still mind. And they said, Thank you, we are of still mind. And let it. They're just people. It's the language and the distance and the separation of culture that makes it seem, sort of not maybe easily relatable. It would just be the same. They would say they're mad, and he would say, Abadiya. You would feel completely normal. It's real people. So again, Jesus says all this. He says to them, you're wrong. And then he says, listen, all of you. And how are the priests supposed to feel? What he said, basically, how ridiculous they're being. Are they going to say, thank you, Master, this is good for my ego? And what do the disciples say? Do they fear this with Jesus? Our guru is an avatar. They say, they're kind of mad, and they have a lot of power and political sway, so just thought you should know they're kind of mad. You see, again, it's a normal human reaction. But Jesus answered and said, Every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted shall be rooted up. Let them alone. They be blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. You've heard that phrase, the blind leading the blind. It's not just from the Bible. Krishna says the same thing in the Gita. That if the blind lead the blind, how will either find their way? You see, it's beautiful. So, Master continues, Every plant of human law of living, which is grown only on the soil of tradition, is a weed, and shall be destroyed by the cosmic law as useless to mankind. You see? Every law of human living, which is only born of tradition. It's so funny sometimes how people say, follow the tradition, respect the tradition. If it's true, sure. If we can see the practice and see a deeper meaning for it, fine. But if it no longer fits us, or if we can't, then does it hold such a sway? There's the story about, I forget who it was, Narayan or something like that, who, when they were going to do the Shraddam ceremony for his grandfather, he noticed his father, there was a dog that walked into the house, walked into the gate, walked into the front door, and the father tied the dog to a post outside with a rope so it wouldn't keep coming in to get all the food. And so then they did the ceremony. So then when that same man, that father, died himself, Narayan, before doing the ceremony, was looking for a dog to tie up outside the house before he could begin the ceremony. And his son was watching, going, okay, taking notes. First find a dog, tie it up, then, it didn't have any in America there was a funny thing, someone making a loaf of bread that they were trying to make, but they sort of cooked it, then they cooked it again. So it was already firm, but then they had to do something. But then they cut, anyway, I was trying to make the story vegetarian, but I just can't, because it seems illogical. Like, if they cooked it, wouldn't... So anyway, it was a roast. They bought a roast, they cut the ends of it off and put it in the pan and cooked it. This is what the grandmother did. So then her daughter, her own daughter, when she got a roast, she also cut the ends of it and put it in the pan. Finally, the granddaughter was doing the same thing, but wondered, why do you need to do it? And so she asked her mother, and she said, I don't know. And she asked her own mother, why is it? She said, why did you cut the ends off? She said, the pan was too small. So we don't want to just follow these things uselessly, not knowing their reason. And on the other hand, I had a friend who, she was a Muslim, and her, on the shraddam, basically, of her grandmother, she was supposed to light a candle, on the death anniversary. And she was my friend, she was in college with me. And her parents would call her and say, this is, basically Pati's death anniversary, did you light the candle? And she would say, no, I'm busy. And busy doing what? Studying. Now, believe me, she was not studying. And so whenever you hear the word studying, it's just the word that will get the parents off your back. It doesn't always mean studying. You study, okay, sorry to disturb. Oh. These kids are smart after all. They got into college, so they know what to say. So anyway, so I said to her, well, why don't you do it? She said, I don't know what it means. So why should I light a candle? Why should I say these prayers and so on? I don't even know what they mean. But then here was the thing. She said, and it bothers me that I would do a ceremony that someone else would do and is doing with deep devotion and understanding. And it seems to me an insult to them if I just go through the motions of something so precious to them without caring about it, without understanding it. I said, my God, don't you see, your father is angry with you, thinking that you're disrespecting the custom, the tradition, and your grandmother. But it's actually, you have even greater respect to even be that sensitive and to care. And so what he's accusing you of, you're not guilty of. In fact, it would probably help him, and you have to tell him. And she said, I won't tell him. Her father was in town. I said, you have to tell him. And so anyway, she finally did tell him, because this had been going on for years and had been building up. And it was such a healing for them. Her father started crying. He said, the questions you're asking about religion, I never asked until I was 50. I'm so proud of you. And this whole thing came about. And so in that sense, that was a good way to look at the tradition. What does it mean? But the thing that makes me laugh the most about traditions, it's like, let's honor, for example, the Swami tradition founded by Shankaracharya. If Shankaracharya did it, we must honor it. And of course, I'm not saying not to. But the point is, it's like, it's been in place for thousands of years. We have to honor his laws. It's the tradition. Well, when did Shankaracharya create those laws? Long ago. And why did he create them? Because he was dissatisfied with the traditions of his day. He was a total rebel. He was saying, all these traditions, ridiculous. People aren't following them. This is what the new rules should be. The old rules that you're supposed to follow were once new. And the people who are grumpy now about you not following them were just as grumpy back then, in a previous lifetime. You see, there were people who Shankaracharya was saying, these rules we should not follow because they no longer hold sway, and they would say, no, you must follow tradition, and they hated him. Then they're reborn 1,000 years later, and somebody else is challenging whether his traditions still all fit, and the same people say, no, we must stick with Shankaracharya. Why? Because that's what's there. You see? So remember that old customs were once new. It doesn't mean they should be thrown out mindlessly. That's just as stupid as following them mindlessly. We should use intelligence. We should understand why. And above all, we should use intuition and personal sort of measure. This may be a beautiful custom, but does it suit me? If you feel so much joy in meditation and so much love for God, then isn't that puja? Isn't that the purpose of puja, in fact? Does it mean you should stop doing puja? Really, that's up to you, I would say. Because you're getting the purpose of it that way, the benefit of it. And so these pujas have great purposes. What if somebody can't meditate? What if they're too restless to meditate? A puja is what we do puja here. But it is engaging to the mind when you can't meditate. Now, that I don't mean to say that's the definitive teaching. I just mean to say that's an example. More could be said, but we have to go on. We're almost done, but I want to read this wonderful thing. So, all those rules that the prophets have declared through their cosmic consciousness as useful to mankind will endure to the end. Let the Pharisees alone. Leave them in their much-loved, self-created darkness. And that's the truth for many people. Sometimes we tear our hearts out trying to convince a person who doesn't want to be convinced. And we have to ask ourselves, why do we want to convince them? Because we have such pure motives of wanting to spread the light to all people, especially the annoying ones who constantly criticize me and make my life miserable. And if they would just be convinced, then they would leave me alone. You see, it's not such an altruistic thing sometimes. Or the person I worry about so much, and if they would just obey this one thing, then they would be happy, and then, I would be happy too. Just a small thing. You see, we have to question our motives. It is my responsibility to take care of this person. I am their parent because there is no God. God is the parent. I mean, who gave you the child in the first place? Who gave the child the parent? God is the one who brings us together. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be responsible, but we should know who gave us the responsibility and on whose behalf we are acting out that responsibility. The Pharisees are spiritually blind leaders of their spiritually blind followers. If the spiritually blind lead the people, blind with ignorance, together they must fall into the misery-making ditch of ignorance. You see again what he's saying. He's saying they will fall into a ditch and we will all laugh because we are all superior. No! He's saying they will suffer. And he's not saying it uncompassionately. But the thing he doesn't say, but is true, and he said elsewhere, is through the suffering, they will learn. Have you ever heard of someone who said, you come to see them and they have 5 burned fingertips? And what happened? I touched the stove with my thumb and it burned. So then just to make sure, I touched it with my next finger, and then, 2 out of 3, so I thought, no! Ow! Is enough. 1 burn is Purim. You don't keep suffering in the same way. You learn. But on the other hand, sometimes it's the only motivator. That suffering motivates us to change. And that's actually the trap of Maya. Because if Maya really made us feel the suffering, we would all become meditators and saints overnight. But the trick of Maya is it makes the suffering so bad that we're not happy, but not bad enough that we're motivated to change. Until it does, until we do start to change, until we say, listen, I do want God after all. But again, watch out for that trap, because it keeps us a little comfortable, because it knows otherwise we just wouldn't want to play anymore. Then answered Peter, one of his disciples, and said to him, declare unto us this parable. And Jesus said, are ye also yet without understanding? What comes into a man's mouth and what comes out of a man's mouth. And you often find Peter asking the question, think, well, what's wrong with Peter? Well, on the other hand, Peter was just asking the question that was in everybody's mind. He was just bold enough to speak up and say, Enade? And Jesus, does he say, let me teach you? He says, are you also not getting this? I mean, you're the disciples. You're supposed to get this. Do not ye yet understand that whatsoever entereth in at the mouth goes into the belly, and is cast out in the draught? But those which proceeded out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, thefts, false witnesses, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashen hands, defiled defiles not a man, makes no one unclean. You see, it's anything you do wrong starts in the heart. And it's according to the heart that we know how clean or pure someone is. Again, and therefore how happy. And does it matter to know, okay, this heart, 52%, that heart, 61%, better than average. No, we're caring about this heart, our own heart, and not to measure it, but to just be in joy with it, to say, how can I be happier? That's the whole purpose of the spiritual path. So now Master explains, O you, my true disciples, are you also without divine understanding? Don't you understand that any outward custom cannot spoil a man because he does not feel it in his heart? Jesus, he goes on to say, don't you know, dear ones, out of the evil tendencies stored up in the heart of men, the chitta or feeling, through their past stored up bad karma, all evil thoughts and actions spring. Desires for adultery and adulterous actions, fornications or idolatry, desires for murders or murderous actions, theftful thoughts and theftful actions, covetous thoughts and covetous actions, desire to appear as false witnesses, and the act of appearing as false witnesses, desire to deceive and deceitful actions, lascivious thoughts and actions, desires to curse and curseful actions. See again, why does he say it twice each time? The desire to do it and the act of doing it. First, work on the act. Stop the act. Then, though, if we're not doing the act but having the desire, then that's the next challenge. So both are needed to be cured. But first we try to, like I said to one kid when I was a school teacher who got so mad, do not hit the other boy. I said, scream, shout, but do not hit. Because if you hit, then you have to be the one in trouble. I know he said something horrible about your mother, and that's why you hit him. And he was wrong to do it. But once you hit him, that kind of blows it. And he gets in trouble, but now he's a black eye and all this. So it's kind of like, so I said, if you don't hit him, then he will be the one in trouble because he said this awful thing. And so the kid tried, and then he started running around the playground screaming, come and get him, I'm going to hit him, just trying so hard not to hit him. And then I was able to say, and why? He said that my father just died, so I could discipline the kid who actually needed the help. So anyway, it's like first work on the outer thing, then work on the words, then the feelings, and then the thoughts, and so on. Okay, so we're not done. Desires to blaspheme and blasphemous actions, feelings of pride and boastful actions, and all foolishness are the children born out of the wicked tendencies stored up in the heart of man, through his ignorant actions of this life and past forms of existence. You notice that word there? See all the wickedness stored up in the heart due to past ignorant actions, not sinful. Even though, in fact, what is sin? Master said it's ignorance. Just because unknowingly we did these things. Why do some children steal? Meaning, some adults do too. But why do some children do? Because they think, I want this, I don't have the money, I would like it though, so I'll take it. Now I have it. Isn't that great? But then they learn that, it's fine until the police come and take the candy out of your hand and also send you off to jail. And then, so there are consequences of this. But at first we don't know any better. It's ignorance. So when you see people making mistakes, when you see yourself making mistakes, if I'm reading all about the wicked tendencies stored up in the heart and you're saying, yeah, that's me, don't think that. It's ridiculous. As Sri Yukteswar said, the vanished lives of all men are dark with many shames. All, every single person. Everything in future will improve if you are making a spiritual effort now. But what are his first words? Forget the past. The past means 1 second ago and beyond. Just make a spiritual effort now. Everybody suffers. I had to give advice to someone. His sister was on this path. He wasn't. She said, he's going to prison tomorrow. He got caught for something he did long ago. He's changed since then. But now he's caught and has to go to jail. Is there any advice you can give him? That's pretty tall order. What do you say to someone who's going to jail? Are they like, well, I'm going to jail, no problem. At least I'll get a bed, 3 meals a day. He was terrified. And what could I say? Well, I was in jail a few times. It's no problem. I didn't know. I didn't have any experience. I could give him any advice. I thought, what do you say? Well, that'll teach you. It's not the time for that. That's what the judge said. That's what the police said. And so the first thing I said to him was, everybody has been to jail in one life or another. So don't feel badly. Don't feel the darkest sinner on earth or anything like that. We've all been there. And there are some people who should be in jail but haven't yet gotten caught. And so just don't focus on that. Pay your time, pay off the karma. You're better off paying it off in this life than in the next life. When you're suddenly arrested because you look like the bad guy, but God says, you say to the police, but I didn't do it. But God said, yeah, but this is when you did do it and I didn't catch you, so now you do it. It's like, that's not fair. But it's better to pay it off now when you do know why it's happening. This is how karma works. It's our great advantage when we can see the cause and effect relationship. But don't feel badly about it. You're just learning. We're all just learning. So if that applies to jail, it applies to everything. So focus on the good in yourself, not on anything else. If there are things that are causing you suffering, heal them. Sure. But for those that you can't heal, just say, okay, Guru, you heal this. Okay, God, you help me. I'm just going to work on the things I can work on. And get that thought completely out of your mind. If nothing else, if you say, well, but it helps me to grow spiritually. You know what helps us to grow spiritually? Concentrating on our sins? No, that just brings us on to them. Concentrate on God. You become what you concentrate on. If you want to be a saint, concentrate on saints. If you want to be happy, concentrate on happiness. Analyze, this made me happy, this didn't make me happy. So forget that. Be like the wise ant. Seize the sugar in life, skip the salt. But what you focus on, that's what you become, the masters say. So focus on the good things and forget the other. So, Master concludes, all these evil tendencies defile him, bringing all forms of miseries unto him. But outward ceremonies, such as eating with washed hands, do not affect the soul of a man. So, it's such a joy to have these teachings explained by the masters. Only then can we really know. If we use our intellectual analysis, well, if you think about it, back in those days, because of the tradition and actually the language, the translation, you can know the whole language and still get it completely wrong. It really has to come from the heart. So live more in the heart. Check in more with your heart. I may have been perfectly right, but my heart feels a little pinched. That's a warning. And on the other hand, if it feels pinched, what do we do? And analyze all the reasons I did wrong, and in fact it's much worse than I thought, and make it more pinched? Pinched? No. Just say, where's the harmonium? I'm just going to chant and sing it all out of my heart. Where's my meditation room? I'm going to say, God, what good can I do in this world, even in my own life, unless you help me? And then just love him more and more, and he'll free you. God bless you.